Welcome to Writers and Books Visiting Author Series. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs. Writers and Book is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, and literary programming for people of all ages and backgrounds, all currently available online. Our theme for 2021 is Taking Care. We're celebrating different ways we can take care of ourselves and take care of others this year. Check out our upcoming schedule at wab.org. Please say hello in the chat and let us know you're there. Feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function. Books are available through our bookstore, Ampersand Books. I'll put the links in the chat. We're so excited to have Elizabeth Everett with us this evening. First, we'll hear from Elizabeth, then she'll be in conversation with Nekesa Afia, author of Dead, Dead Girls. A Lady's Formula for Love is Elizabeth Everett's first novel, inspired by her admiration for rule breakers and belief in the power of love to change the world. She lives in upstate New York with her family near sites that figure prominently in the history of civil rights and women's suffrage. As the author Joanna Shupe has said, fiercely feminist and intensely romantic, A Lady's Formula for Love is a fresh take on historical romance that's guaranteed to delight readers. Elizabeth is also teaching a workshop this Saturday on how to write a romance and smash the patriarchy. There's still time to sign up. I'll put the link in the chat. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to turn it over to you. It's all yours.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Everett, and tonight I will be reading from my debut novel, A Lady's Formula for Love. And I am so thrilled to be here at Writers and Books. It is a wonderful community resource that my children have taken advantage of for years. They do an excellent summer rights program. So if anyone is in the area and wants to take advantage of it, I highly recommend it. A Lady's Formula for Love is the story of, hold it up, Violet Graycliffe, a widow who is also a chemist. And when her husband dies, she uses her fortune to create a club called Athena's Retreat. It is a haven for scientists around England, specifically for women scientists. When her stepson asks her to create an antidote for a chemical weapon, she comes under fire and is in need of a bodyguard. Enter Arthur Nayland, who is a counter-assassin, has been away from England for 20 years, and he is friends with Violet's stepson and agrees as one last mission to protect her so that she can figure out a chemical antidote in service to the crown. Tonight, I will be reading from the beginning of chapter 3. Afterwards, I'm going to have a conversation with Nekesa Afia, the author of Dead, Dead Girls, which is a mystery and the first book in the Harlem Renaissance series. And she and I will be talking a little bit about writing in genre fiction, specifically historical fiction, and some of the obstacles we've encountered and some of the reasons that we write in genre fiction as opposed to literary fiction. First, I have to put my spectacles on. Chapter 3. Violet said goodbye to Gray one last time, closed the door, and slumped against the wall. Oh, sorry. This is after she's met Arthur Nayland. He saved her from an explosion. And her friends have been giving him a grilling. And everyone has gone home, and it's just the two of them together. A pair of penumbra lamps stood on either side of a large mirror in the foyer, their glass shades casting an eerie orange light across the black and white tiled floor. When Violet's husband was very ill, she would wander the house at night in between bouts of nursing him, hammering out the details of complex formulas in her head as death hovered in the background. Here in Beacon House, the night was never silent, and she was intimately familiar with the origin of every click and squeak. Therefore, she addressed her remarks to the large shadow in a corner without having to see him. You are awfully quiet for such a large man. How do you do it?" Arthur emerged from a shallow indentation beneath the staircase. Flickering light brushed the hollows of his sun-browned cheeks. "I have had 20 years of practice," he answered. "It pays to be quiet when one is a counter-assassin, even when one is hired at a discount." Violet chuckled. "I don't expect you bargained for the three of us when Gray approached you," she said. "He calls us the Coven, you know. Did they scare you?" "Yes," he said dryly. Violet laughed in appreciation, happy a real person resided within the stoic figure. "Gray described the nature of your service before he left. He said, the Queen offered you a medal ceremony after you saved Lord Dickerson, yet you refused." Appearing unimpressed by the Queen's gesture, he moved away from the wall. Although his gaze remained fixed on her, Violet wouldn't have been surprised if he had memorized the exact position of the cut-glass bowl on the entry table and how many sconces were attached to the wall behind him. They regarded each other in the dim hallway without awkwardness, an odd familiarity between them after the strange events of the night. She'd learned the shape of him before she'd even learned his name. "Although he failed to warn me of your friends," Arthur said, "Gray did say you have a habit of collecting ladies under your wing." Letty and Phoebe are founding members of Athena's retreat Not Wounded Birds. Although he complains when they are around, he misses them when they are not. She leaned toward Arthur with a conspiratorial air. He'll never admit to it, however. "You care for Gray." "Yes," she said. Ah, with his tone, Arthur had asked a question without asking the question. An estimable talent. "Gray's father, Daniel, swept me off my feet the first month of my debut season." A familiar ache began in the pit of her stomach as she explained. "He was the epitome of sophistication and romance. He made every other man seem slow and callow in comparison, despite his age." The low light kept Arthur's reaction to this confession a mystery, if he had one. "Gray mentioned his father was charismatic," he said. Violet tilted her head as she considered the word. "He projected such certainty, as if he had the answer to everything. As a young woman whose brain was filled with nothing but questions, I found this quality incredibly compelling." So compelling, she'd ignored the concerns of her family and the tiny warnings in her own head and rushed into marriage. Daniel had been just as hasty. Worried about Gray's health, he had believed a young wife would guarantee a chance at another child. He'd been enamored as well of the chance to mold a young woman with the promise of brilliance. What they found most attractive about each other, however, quickly drove them apart. Daniel's certainty made him judgmental and controlling. Violet's brilliance did not spill over into the areas of politics and social maneuvering where Daniel's interests lay. "Folks with small minds enjoy pointing out that Gray is a few years older than me," she acknowledged. Gray's childhood struggle with the falling sickness had isolated him as a child, although his seizures were rare by the time they met. In the early years of her marriage to his father, she'd researched cures and dispelled old-fashioned notions of cold baths and bloodletting as relief. They'd formed a friendship that grew closer as his father's flaws revealed themselves, but he left for the army soon after and rarely returned home, even after Daniel grew ill. When the flood of midnight memories threatened to drown her, Violet cleared her throat and forced brightness into her tone, returning to Arthur's question. "Although he is not my natural son, Gray is my family." Arthur cocked his head, hearing what she was not saying. This conversation beneath a conversation worked both ways. He stood so still. His peace amid the chaos was what first drew her attention, as though an invisible circle of calm surrounded him. She wanted to cup her hand and dip it into that pool of calm, pour it over her or drink deep, whatever method necessary to find her own peace. "Do you truly believe I am under threat?" This man was not one to waste his time. She asked anyway, hoping for a different answer. Couldn't the second floor explosion have been a coincidence? Gray has a nose for danger. He wouldn't have asked me to stay in London and pay me what he's paying me if he didn't think your talents have made you a target. Violet sighed. I am not as gifted as he thinks. Her new protector moved closer until her skirts brushed his shoes. Heat raced up her neck when she remembered his hand clasping the back of her head, his hips resting against hers, and the certainty of safety in his arms. Her gloves had been dirtied and torn when she fell to the ground earlier. She'd left them off, and he caught her bare hand in his. In his large hands, her hand seemed alien, delicate and feminine rather than chapped and ungainly. There were tiny scars across the backs of her hands and the tips of her fingers. Here is evidence you've performed a great many experiments. The matter-of-factness of his voice contrasted with the deliberate stroke of his thumb over the mound of her palm. How long had it been since a man had touched Violet? Excitement woke the nerves beneath her skin. Is Gray wrong? Are you the most accident-prone chemist in Europe rather than the most brilliant? He is, Violet had to clear her throat for words to emerge. He is overestimating my abilities. Once again, she pictured the ferocity of Arthur's gaze on her face as the world had exploded around them. More important than my safety is the well-being of the women in the club next door. They already risk so much to come here night after night and do their work. Gray understands my devotion to the club, and I am grateful he sent you to us. Until he returns, please consider Beacon House your home. Surprised at his cynical expression, she squeezed his hand. You might find us unconventional. I like to think we are nevertheless a happy household, and you must call me Violet. His jaw tensed for one moment before his expression froze into a mask of indifference. I am your bodyguard, not your friend, not a guest. Gray is paying me money to stay here and keep you safe. A chill prickled the exposed skin of her neck at his words. Arthur dropped her hand. My task is to keep you alive and unhurt, nothing more nor less. No frost chilled his voice, and no disdain crossed his face. Nothing in his tone or manner gave any hint to the feelings within, but in a blink he stood 2 feet away, hands behind his back. The loss of his touch left her lightheaded. I did not mean to offend, she said. I meant to make you welcome in my home while you carry out your duties. Don't. The word dropped between them like a rock tossed into the water and cleared away the sensual haze as effectively as an icy splash. Let me do my job. Anything more than that and you become a distraction. Distraction leads to failure. In my line of work, if I failed, it means you're dead. So that was the beginning of chapter 3. And I would like to take the time now to introduce my questioner, Ms. Nekesa Afia, who is the author of Dead, Dead Girls. As I said, it is the first mystery in the Harlem Renaissance series. And she is a very, very talented author. I've had the pleasure of reading the book before it debuts. It is coming out on June 1st. And yeah, so she and I are going to chat a little bit about genre fiction. So welcome, Nekesa.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Elizabeth, first, can I say that I love listening to you read, and maybe you should have done my audiobook.
Thank you.
You have a great voice. I mean, actually, my audiobook narrator is pretty great, but you're also very good.
Thank you.
Okay, so first, so when I decided to write Dead, Dead Girls, it's because I've always had a love for like puzzles. Mysteries are really just puzzles. That's a trade secret. And solving things and just like, I've always just loved mysteries. So that's why I decided to ultimately try and write one. So why did you start writing historical romance?
I actually didn't discover romance until I was much older, and I had a stereotypical view of romance that most people have who hadn't read it. I was very dismissive of it, and I thought it was I thought it was regressive, and I read one by accident. Amazon had picked out, I was reading some historical mysteries because I love mysteries as well. And I also think that's an underrated genre. And Amazon, this is back when it had an algorithm that really worked, sent me, you should read this. And I did. And I was halfway through. It was by the author Julianne Long. And I said, this is not a mystery. This is a romance. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And I started to read in that genre voraciously. And there were some things about that genre that I loved. I loved that love was centered. I loved that women's voice was centered. And I loved how subversive it was while still being joyful. So I read so many of them. I decided one day I ran out of them, so I was gonna write my own.
It's lovely. And what type of research do you have to do, especially for the Victorian era London there you've written? Sorry. Sorry.
We, people always do people ask you if you're a historian?
No, I've never gotten that.
That's interesting because people always ask me, oh, did you major in history or were you a historian? There's a thing called Google. But I actually started out writing regencies. I've written one regency that's not published, and my agent was like, "Well, they're not selling very well. Why don't you try Victorian?" So I went and bought like a stack at the used bookstore of all sorts of reference books and really fun, like lots of books on like costuming and clothing, and just yes, I know that would get you because you're a sewist. And I just did a deep dive into it. And I'm continually, actually, I don't know, I'm like what you're doing because you write in the 1920s, but I'm continually researching, continually trying to pull stuff out, especially because it's much more difficult because I write about women scientists and there were so few. So I'm always trying to like search out real, actual legitimate sources for that research.
Yeah, and I've always loved your series on Instagram where you've been naming and showing us female scientists, women historical scientists, and like what they did. So, how did you decide to make Violet a scientist and her friends, her like group around her, also scientists?
I wrote this book in 2018. So it was before COVID, but it was during an administration where scientists were being, and science as a whole was just being disregarded and dismissed. And so I knew I wanted to write about a group of friends and a group of women. And I just thought, what's something subversive that they could be doing? And it was science. It was because here in the real world, it was science. And so in my book, it was science.
I read your book before it came out late last year, and I've always loved it. Like, I love the settings. So many people do dismiss mystery as a formulaic, and we're often overlooked when it comes to the literary craft. I love writing mystery just because I think it's a great way to like shine a light on like very real problems, even through like the lens of fiction. And I know that my book, I do try to like cover that in my book with all these Black girls ending up dead, and then like the only person who can solve it is a Black woman. So, do you think romance is a fitting genre to explore larger societal issues?
I absolutely do. I absolutely do. And again, it's because there's so many things. I'm going to be teaching this course on Saturday, writing romance and smashing the patriarchy. And one thing the patriarchy hates is about romance is that romance centers love. Like romance is centering not greed, not fear, not selfishness. It's centering something that's selfless. It centers love. So that's one reason why if you want to write in a genre and you I think that sometimes with literary fiction, people are expecting to be given a message and they're kind of like, oh, okay, let's go dig in it. And it's going to be hard and we're going to work at it. And that's why it's so fabulous. They don't expect that when they pick up a piece of genre fiction. Like they don't expect when they pick up Dead Girls that I think that they're open to enjoying it. And because they're open, they're going to be more receptive to that message of, no, but look what was happening, and look what they have to go through, and look at their obstacles. And it's the same thing in romance, because people are picking it up with kind of this open, like, I'm going to enjoy myself, this is going to be something wonderful. You can also weave in different themes and different subject matter that you really want to address, but you do it in that, on that framework. And it's not such a slog, and it becomes kind of, revelatory, and it becomes, and it stays happy, it stays joyous. Because the one thing about romance, the one thing about mystery is, in the end, you figure out who did it, which is formulaic, but it's satisfying. And the one thing about romance is, in the end, you get a happily ever after, which is also formulaic, but which is deeply, deeply, especially in these times, deeply satisfying.
Yeah, I love a happily ever after. So while you're writing, and like as you continue to like write these books and like write the series, how do you make sure that the topics you're trying to get across aren't seen as like preachy, or they're not taking over like the major message, or they're like not also getting lost? Because I find the balance is kind of tough to find.
Oh, okay, that's interesting, because so I think the way you do that with a romance is that you make sure the romance is front and center, right? You're writing a romance, and so you can only get so, in the book I explore feminism in that these women are have to hide who they are and what their passions are and what they're, what they want to do because of society's pressure. So that's, people talk a lot about why it's feminist, and it's not really feminist, it's just honest, right? That women are oppressed now. I mean, women are oppressed then, women are oppressed now, but I center that romance. That's what I do. I just bring it back to the fact that these two people, these two fools, don't think they're going to fall in love, but they are. I'm going to make them, and they're going to be super happy. So what about you? Because you have a sleuth. She's an amateur sleuth, and she has to figure out do you do that by centering the mystery, by coming back to the clues?
Yeah, I do. I especially because Lou is so like amateur, and she truly doesn't know what she's doing. She just wants to vibe and kiss her girlfriend, which honestly, big mood. So she just, I just haven't just that's funny, right?
For all of us, friend.
Just because just like focusing on the mystery, and like getting her to like talk to all the suspects, and like getting her to go through like all the clues, and then like getting her to be like, because I found that she like likes to like go off track or like go off plot sometimes, and she'll just be like, I'm gonna go dancing. No, Lou, you can't go dancing, there's a murder to solve, please stop this. She's so stubborn, oh my god. But so just like keeping her like on track, and then like making sure that there's like enough like twists or like some like turns or like red herrings in the book to like keep both myself and Lou interested. I know she's not real. Please don't tell me she's not real. I know. It just feels that way now.
I'm so glad you're not the only person that talks about your characters taking over and like running away with the plot.
I always say that if Lou were real, she wouldn't like me because she doesn't like anyone.
I love that Lou is, there's a comment in the chat. Olivia says Lou is real.
You're right, Olivia, thanks.
So we should mention the plot of your book, actually. Since
of course.
He doesn't know.
So yeah, Dead Girls, it's right here. It comes on sale June 1st, 2021. It's about an amateur sleuth named Louise Lloyd, who gets caught up in a series of murders that takes place in Harlem, where she lives, and she's like, I don't want to do it, but then she gets extorted into solving the crime, so she has to.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why I was excited that you agreed to come on and talk about genre fiction with me is that you have a Black heroine, which we don't often see in mystery.
Yeah, we're seeing it. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. And I was going to say, like, I wanted, and I just thought you had a really unique perspective on genre fiction, because not only are you, a young woman writing in it, but you're a young Black woman writing about a young Black woman.
Yeah, so we are seeing like more and more like Black female leads now, which is great and awesome. But I grew up in this province called Alberta, which is very white, and it was very hard to find books that starred women like me, like Black women, unless it was like very specific, like Black authors writing for Black characters and Black readers. So I want something a little bit, this is the horrible word to use, but more mainstream and like more like centered and more out there. And yeah, I think we also have a very romanticized view of the 1920s, thanks to that copywriting that F. Scott Fitzgerald, who, you know, stole from Zelda a lot. So I think I've tried to give like a different look to the 1920s, or a different feel, or different vibes, I like to call them.
That's interesting because there's a couple of other romance authors that are writing in the Victorian period, but I chose the beginning of the Victorian period because the Victorian period really spanned about 70, I mean, 3 generations you consider Victorian. And like you said, what were the 1920s that wasn't romanticized, the real 1920s? The Victorian period was so broad and so long that I chose the beginning of the Victorian period, which was very, very different than late Victorian. And I think that most people, when they think Victorian, they think steampunk, they think of all these inventions, they think of women's suffrage. But when Victoria was a very young queen, the country was in a completely different space. They had the Napoleonic Wars. They had a profligate prince who became a king, who was kind of a lackluster king. They had economic hardships. They were about to, like a few years after my book is set, they were about to have the Irish potato famine, but they had, political issues in Ireland. So it was a tumultuous time. And when we have tumultuous times, people become very conservative. And so I just saw some parallels between the early 1840s and now. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's 2021. How about some parallels with the 1920 and 21?
Yeah, well, I am glad that there's not like a murderer running on the loose. Although, how would that? It would probably be really easy to kill someone right now because we're all at home, we're all stuck in our apartments. We can just go out, do it, and come back in. I'm not weird. Sorry, I do write murder mysteries. Right though, think about it.
Okay, so that's another book. I like it.
Yeah. But yeah, so like I do think that we'll see like another type of form of the Roaring 20s, because like we're just stuck inside. So I think that we're all gonna go feral once we all get our vaccines and everything opens up again. And we're just gonna be like wearing our best stuff to like the grocery store because we haven't seen it. We haven't been able to wear it in like years. And we're just gonna vibe. We're gonna have fun. I'm so excited.
Ball gowns to the grocery store.
I went to get my vaccine yesterday and I wore like this opulent black jumpsuit just because I could. Because it was in my closet.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. What I'm wondering too is so your book is out on NetGalley, so it's been reviewed. Okay. And we're going to go back to talking about writing historical genre fiction. Historical genre fiction. What do you find that frustrates you when you're writing historical fiction and people get wrong all the time?
You know what really bugs me? This is going to be so niche, but the way people dressed in the 1920s is not the way you think they dressed in the 1920s. It's just not. And also, it changed so wildly from the beginning of the decade to like the end of the decade. And also, like I was listening to this podcast called Red-Handed. Yeah, Red-Handed. And they mentioned that apparently the length of women's skirts is directly correlated to how the economy is going. So like
I've heard that as well.
So like if the economy is like going really well, their skirts are super short, but then like in the 1930s, the stock market crashed and like skirts went right back down. And then in the 1940s, they started to raise them. I thought it was a very like interesting theory, which but back to my point. So women's clothes were not what you think they were. Men's clothes were always just very nice and very fancy. They always just looked like that. And like getting the tiny details of like what she'd wear on a night out, or like what she'd wear to work, or like what she'd wear to go sleuthing was so intensely specific. I also did things like looking up when styrofoam cups were invented. I just looked up
Yes. Yeah. So that's something too, I had to look to see when vulcanized rubber was developed and when, yes, absolutely.
You just become like a total expert on things that are so not relevant to your daily life.
Yes, it's true. That's so funny. So Allison asked a question. This is a question for you, Nekesa. What is your opinion of Walter Mosley's mysteries, which also have political subject positions?
Okay, so I cannot say that I've read a Walter Mosley, but I do think that mysteries that do take in politics could be really interesting, as long as they handle it the right way. I hate saying this, but I am a little like sensitive when it comes to politics, just because I've been burned so many times and I've seen so many things go wrong that like I do have to be careful about what I read for fun, because I don't want to be like burned out on being like, oh god, this world sucks, while I'm like trying to have fun or just vibe. So okay. Yeah, so I will definitely take that suggestion out and check them out. Thank you, Allison.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's and that kind of goes back to my point about why I write romance, specifically historical romance, is because the formula is so satisfying. And the skill set, if you read a wide varieties of romance, obviously the skill set comes into how you're going to make that formula new and enticing each time you write a book. But I love that I can pick up a romance and I know that no matter what happens, these guys, these women, these friends, whatever, that these people are going to find their way to each other, and they're going to grow and they're going to fit together by the end. So I love all genres. I read, well, pre-pandemic I read voraciously. In mid-pandemic and post-pandemic I've kind of had a slump, but I love that one thing about romance is that it's so reliable that at the end I can put it down and breathe a sigh of release. I'm not gonna have to make my husband turn the light on. I have to, I'm not gonna be weepy when I don't want to be weepy. It's what I need when I need it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also, like with historical fiction, there's always the chance to like play with tropes, like the well-run like enemies to lovers or whatever. That's my favorite trope, so that's why I named it. But it's fun to like put it into like a new light in historical fiction, just because there's so many like different things that are possible. And I also find that's the same with mystery. There's no question coming here. I just like tropes. Sorry.
I love tropes as well. I love when you have like two tropes and people are like, oh, how are you gonna make them both work? How are you gonna do that? I know. She has another question. Is it important to you to make a distinction between genre fiction and literary fiction? It is important to me. What about you? Like, so we're having this conversation because we both write in genre fiction, and genre fiction is generally looked down upon. It's generally dismissed by mainstream and literary fiction because of the formulas, because you're going to have in a mystery, it's going to be solved. In a romance, they're going to have a happily ever after. I think where some people think it blurs a line is when you have excellent writing in genre fiction. People are surprised by that.
Yeah, but that's just like good writing. It's good writing. Yeah, I think the distinction is really important because like I'm a genre fiction writer, you're a genre fiction writer, so it's important to like get the word out, especially like in our specific genres like historical romance and like especially in historical mystery or mystery period. It's just so like important to just get the word out and be like, this is genre fiction and I'm really proud of it. Please read it. It's so good. Please read my book. It's so good.
No, but it's true. But I mean, the thing is that I think, there's just stereotypes about genre fiction. And so people won't pick it up. Oh, I never read. I mean, I can't tell you how many people said, oh, I don't read romance. That's, that's a whole genre that you're cutting yourself off from.
There's so many great writers you're totally ignoring because they're what? Romance writers?
Yeah. And it's the same thing for mystery. Well, mystery is Agatha Christie. And you no, historical mystery is not. It's so rich and it's so deep and it's so fun. It's so wide. Like what are some of your subgenre favorites in the mystery genre?
you know what I've always wanted to do? This is tangent, but I've always wanted to like set a mystery that's like Clue, where it's like one night and like they have to get it done in that one night, or else like the killer will leave. I'd love to do that. But like my favorite like subgenres are like, of course, historical. I'm really into like political thrillers just because like I love SVU and I love The Good Wife. Honestly, I just love reading mysteries, and I'll probably read anyone you put in front of me. That's actually not true. I'm really picky about what I read, but I do love mysteries. I'm picky about everything. I really can't help it. What about you? What are some historical fiction genres that you like? Or yeah,
So subgenres.
yes.
Let's see. I always so one of the problems, I think, or one of the struggles in historical romance is that titles, like the aristocracy sells. So that's why, even though there were only 18 dukes in England in 1820, there are 5,000 books about 5,000 different dukes. So that's where we cross the line between historical romance and historical romantic fantasy, right? Because these dukes in these books all have lovely teeth and good skin and bathe.
I'd love to live in that fantasy where they all bathe.
There is not daily bathing. So all those scenes where the heroine creeps up on the hero and he's in the bath, he's staying, you know, teeth. So my favorite subgenre of the historical romance is oftentimes earlier, like medieval or so, 1600s, where it's not, they don't have a preponderance always of the aristocracy. You don't always have to have a duke or a viscount or a baron or what have you. I think you have a little bit more freedom if you're not in that Regency time period to write about all of the other people that lived in England at the time. And that's the other thing I tried to do in A Lady's Formula for Love, was kind of point out that there were other people living in London besides dukes and ladies and whatnot, that there were queer folk and there were brown folk and there were lots and lots of people who don't have titles, and they were all living really full, really, important lives. And we shouldn't forget that, because I would say, that's the drawback of my genre. And I would be the first to say it, is that up until now, it's been a very white genre, centered around very white people, and not just white, but but again, the aristocracy. So I'm very excited because there's a lot of great writers coming out now who are writing own voices, historical romance, and really reminding people that there was a whole world out there that weren't just white dukes and their white maids and what have you.
Yeah, that brings me to like another thought. In A Lady's Formula for Love, your like cast of characters was so rich and like so like diverse, and you had so many people and so many women, especially, just living their lives, vibing their vibes. So how did you manage to work with such a large cast of characters, where I have like 6 main characters, but you had like a lot of like supporting characters and a lot of people who all like had like their own separate ambitions. So how did you do that? Please teach me so I can write a book.
I did too many. I think that in the next book, which comes out in February, A Perfect Equation, I sort of calmed that down. And I don't know about you, but they're all in my head. Like they just come, they open the door, they walk into the story as I'm writing, and they make themselves known. So it's very hard for me to close the door on them and say, you need to wait. There's too many of you. So they just come. Like, and I think too, like, I don't know about you, but in terms of research, but the more research I do, the more characters pop into my head.
Yeah, because you're like you're like reading something really cool, and you're like, oh my god, that should totally be a character in the book, and then you're like, wait, I don't have room. I don't have the room, I don't have the time, I don't have you just cannot put them in a novel. So dancing, we have one more question, so I've got one more question for you.
Okay,
where would you time travel to if time travel is possible?
If time travel is possible,
yeah, past or future, which decade?
Okay, it's got to be some time when we're still bathing. We're bathing. I don't think that I would actually want to go into the 1920s. I think I would want to go to the Gilded Age. I think I would want to go like the 1890s, 1910s. I think that would be my kind of sweet spot. I find that very fascinating. And I think the politics was fascinating. I think the lead up to World War I was fast. I mean, I think that for me, if I stop writing Victorians, that might be what I pick up. What about you?
Oh, I don't know, because racism is so persistent. Maybe the 1920s though, because I think it'd be just fun to, dance. If not, the 1950s, even though segregation was bad.
It's true. You'd have to be really thoughtful about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot more than me. Oh, and we have one more question. Have you read The Lady Brewer of London? It is in the 15th century. Would you consider it a romance or women's fiction? I'm seeing more hybrid women's fiction where there is romance, but it's almost a subplot. Okay, well, we don't have time for this tonight, but if we had another 6 hours, Nekesa and I could talk about blurred lines in marketing between what's called women's fiction, which I like to call fiction.
It's fiction.
Written by women, and romance. That is very much, I think, and I think Nekesa agrees with me, a marketing distinction and not a distinction that writers necessarily want to make. Would you agree?
I definitely agree with that. I definitely feel like we should stop putting a division between fiction and women's fiction, because it's just kind of condescending too.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. So what do you think? I think we did great.
Me too. I feel like we smashed it.
Yeah, we were wonderful.
Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Nekesa. You can buy their books at Ampersand. The link is in the chat. Elizabeth's workshop is this Saturday. You can still sign up. That link is available as well. I want to thank our funders. And so you can catch up with previous readings as well as this one at our website, wab.org. And thank you for coming and have a great night.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nekesa.
Thank you.
Thanks.